You know, for the longest time, psychoanalysis has had a pretty specific, and let's be honest, pretty provocative take on religion. But today, we're going to dive into a radical rethinking of that relationship. We're going to look at rabbinic Judaism not as some kind of problem to be solved, but actually as a super sophisticated solution for survival. Let's get into it. So let's just start with the question that really kicked off this entire debate, shall we? Is religion a form of collective mental illness? I mean, that's a bold, pretty uncomfortable question, right? But it's the one that psychoanalysis basically forced the world to ask. And of course, this is the guy who made that question famous, Sigmund Freud. He drops this bombshell of an idea, calling religion a universal obsessional neurosis. He's looking at all the rituals, the rules, the guilt, and he's diagnosing it just like he would a patient on his couch in Vienna. And that really sets up the big question for us today. Was Freud right? Is a tradition like rabbinic Judaism a pathology, a symptom of some deep, dark trauma that needs to be cured? Or is it something else entirely? A powerful, practical tool designed for survival? Is it a sickness or is it a solution? All right, so first, let's really get into Freud's diagnosis, because he wasn't just making some casual comparison here. Oh no, he developed a full-blown theory arguing that Judaism operates exactly like a neurotic symptom. So here's the core of his theory, and it's a wild one. He basically argued that way back when, the Jewish people mythically murdered their leader, Moses. He claimed this act was so traumatic that it got collectively repressed, totally buried and forgotten. And the entire religion of Judaism? Well, that was the symptom that grew out of this hidden crime. So here's how Freud maps it all out. He literally takes his clinical formula for an individual's neurosis and just applies it to the entire history of a people. You've got the initial trauma, the murder, then a latency period where everyone forgets about it, then boom, the outbreak of the illness, the religion itself. And that feeling of guilt, that's just the original murder constantly bubbling back up, something he called the return of the repressed. Now, for decades, that was pretty much the main story from psychoanalysis. But then comes Jacques Lacan. And in his later work, he gives us a totally different tool, a completely new way to look at this whole thing. He called it the syntho. Okay, to really get this, we got to be super clear on the words. For Freud, a symptom is like a coded message. It has a secret meaning tied to some trauma you've buried. And the whole point of therapy is to crack the code, figure out the meaning, and make the symptom go away, to cure it. The synthome, though, is something totally different. It's not a message you need to decode. It's more like a practice, a kind of personal know-how. It's this unique thing a person, or even a whole group, invents to hold their world together when everything else is falling apart. You don't interpret a symptom, you use it. It's what keeps you going. Okay, so when you put these two models side by side, the difference is just staggering. With Freud, the origin is this mythic, forgotten murder, and the goal is to get cured. But with the Lacanian model, the origin is a real historical disaster. Its function isn't to hide something, but to act as a practical knot that holds reality together. And the goal? Not to get rid of it, but to learn how to use it. This is a complete 180. So to make this a little more concrete, Lacan's favorite example was the author James Joyce. Lacan argued that Joyce's incredibly complicated, obsessive writing style wasn't a symptom of some problem. It was his personal syntome. The very act of writing for him was the knot that held his mind together and kept him from completely falling apart. It was his solution for living. So if we run with this idea, if rabbinic Judaism is a synthom, a solution, then what was the problem it was solving? What was the huge catastrophe that made this kind of sophisticated knot necessary in the first place? Well, this model says we need to stop looking for a repressed myth and start looking at a very real historical trauma. And here it is, the big switch. We're trading Freud's speculative murder of Moses for something that absolutely, verifiably happened, the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans in the year 70. This wasn't some repressed, forgotten event. This was a world-ending catastrophe right at the center of Jewish life, and everyone knew it happened. And why was this so psychologically devastating? Well, the temple wasn't just a building. In psychoanalytic terms, it was the central organizing signifier. It was the anchor that held their entire reality together, their identity, their laws, their connection to God. When it was destroyed, it didn't just break their hearts, it ripped a giant hole in the fabric of their universe, risking a total psychological collapse for the entire people. So, faced with this total collapse, a new solution had to be invented, a new way to tie reality back together. And this is where we can really see Rabbinic Judaism as a synthome, a clever three-part knot designed to hold the collective psyche together. The first strand of this knot has to deal with the symbolic register. That's the realm of language, of law, of all the shared meanings that make up our social world. So what's the practice that ties this knot? It's the endless process of studying the Talmud. And here's the key. It's not about finding one single final answer in the text. No, it's a process that just loves contradictions, wordplay, and these incredibly complex arguments. The point isn't to arrive at the truth, but to find enjoyment in the process of interpretation itself. The text becomes this thing you desire, constantly generating new meanings and holding the whole symbolic order together. Okay, next up, the synthome has to deal with the real. Now, in Lacanian theory, the real isn't our everyday reality. It's the raw, chaotic, often traumatic part of existence. It's the world of our intense drives and something Lacan called jouissance, this kind of excessive, overwhelming enjoyment that's actually painful. And the tool for knotting the real? Halacha, or Jewish law. But this is so different from Freud's idea of law as just a bunch of no-nos to handle guilt. Instead, you can think of it as a template for enjoyment. It doesn't try to stamp out our drives, it channels their intense pressure into manageable, everyday routines. By meticulously organizing everything, time, food, relationships, it kind of tames the chaotic real, turning all that potentially destructive energy into a shared, sustainable practice. And finally, the third strand of the knot, the imaginary register. This is the realm of the ego, of our identity, of how we see ourselves. After the temple was destroyed, a whole new way of having a collective identity was needed. This model proposes a kind of Jewish cogito, a new form of self-identification. It's not the famous I think, therefore I am, which puts the self in charge. It's almost the opposite. It's an identification with being the remnant, the piece that's kind of left over in relation to God. It's like saying, I am this piece that doesn't quite fit, and I exist for the other. By embracing this unique position, the collective psyche finds a new, incredibly stable way to tie the imaginary together. So, what happens when you put these three knots together? The deep engagement with text, the careful management of drives through law, and this unique way of identifying yourself, well, what you get is a completely new and powerful way to understand what Rabbinic Judaism is even for. And this is really the big takeaway. When you look at it as a synthome, Rabbinic Judaism stops being primarily a system of beliefs that you have to understand. Instead, it becomes a savoir-faire, an embodied know-how. It's a complex, practical, functioning art of survival, basically engineered to help people live with and even thrive after a trauma that completely destroyed their world. And that leaves us with one last, pretty provocative thought, and it goes way beyond just this topic. What if the real key to resilience, for us as individuals and for us as groups, isn't about trying to analyze and get rid of our symptoms? What if instead it's about figuring out the unique, custom-made knots that hold us together, and then learning how to use them?